Mark. Mark Carbo. The laptops are showing you need to reboot. You might want to get up here and click yes before Tommy Angel gets here.
Yes, it is.
All right, we'll call to order this board workshop for the CAFR review. First item is review of the audit results and presentation of the 2017-2018 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report by external auditor Burton Colder of Colder, Slavin and Company, LLC. Mr. Colder.
Thank you, Justin. As he indicated, we're here today to go over some of the summary results, so to speak, of the report for last year, which is the financial statements for the year ending June 30th of 2018. You probably have before you a 175-page report, which is the comprehensive annual financial report, which you've seen in the past. We've extracted certain items out of this, and you have, it should be called a supplemental information, and this is what we're going to go over here today. And we have it, of course, up on the screen, and it's showing up on your computers. The first thing we wanted to mention is, and I'm happy to say this is the 4th year we have no management letter comments. So we haven't had a management letter comment on Lafayette Parish School Board since 2014, which is great, and we don't have one again this year. So keep up the good work there. We do have some internal control and compliance findings, and those are found on pages 24 through 29. We can certainly scan those. I don't know if we need to read them verbatim. You can certainly look at those yourselves, but you have the description of the findings, and there's 6 findings this year. And of the 6, there's 3 from early childhood, the early childhood program, and we still had those 3 last year. What happened is some of these overlapped into from last fiscal year and overlapped into this current fiscal year. So we're hopeful that some of this may be eliminated and not have to be presented in next year's report. We have 2 findings on Gear Up, and those are new findings for this year. And we do have 1 finding which you've seen in the past on the school activity funds, which is the first finding on page 24. About the policies and procedures regarding collections of monies for various fundraisers. We do see some improvement in this area, and in speaking with your staff who does internal auditing in that respect, it looks like we're seeing further improvements for this current fiscal year. So we're hopeful that maybe this can be modified and or eliminated in the near term. But you've seen this in the past. We've talked about it, and we didn't feel it was strong enough. We do see some improvements, as I said, but we don't see it strong enough to be able to eliminate the finding. So any questions or specific items that possibly we want to go over? Again, you have the corrective action plan, and we have the indication of the person, of the contact person from as your representative from the school system, to indicate who presented this action plan regarding the individual findings. Okay, if we don't have any questions on that, what I'd like to do is to look at the schedule of revenues, and this will be back towards the front of the report, and it's going to be found on page 3. Schedule of revenues, general fund only. Page 3. Your revenues here are broken out, of course, as always, between the parish sources, the state sources, and any federal sources, which are minimal in the general fund. If you look at the parish sources and you have the budget comparison, which is the final amended budget for 2018, you have the actual number, actual that was received in ad valorem taxes or recorded, and variance from that budget, and you have the 2017 number on the right side. I'm going to focus, because your budgets are very, very close. If you look at it, total revenues were budgeted at $278,378,000. Came in slightly higher than that. I say slightly, it's $670,000 higher than that at $279,048. Let's look at the details of that within parish sources. And I'm going to focus on last year's totals and this year's totals, the actual numbers. Property taxes are very close. They're up about $400,000 over the prior year. They were $74,486,000 last year, $74,871,000 for the current year. Your sales taxes, you did have an increase here from $70,200,000 to $72,642,000. Interest on interest-bearing deposits went up from $773,000 to $1,633,000. And the rentals, leases, and royalties went up from $288,000 to $405,000. Under other, which is the tuition for the summer school and driver's ed, that went down from $484,000 to $421,000. And in miscellaneous, a catch-all number went from $3.3 million last year to $688,000 this year. Oh, it was insurance proceeds on this that you had received last year. Total parish sources, $149,593,000 last year, and that included the $3.3 million of miscellaneous. This year, parish sources, $151 million. So it's up slightly, about $1 million over the prior year.
Was the insurance proceeds, was that for flooding?
Yes.
Now, does that also count any FEMA money?
If you look down, Eric, whatever would be in the federal grants. There's not a whole lot there.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
That's mainly insurance proceeds. State sources, the revenues here, the equalization, the MFP, went up $10 million from $115,880,000 to $125,815,000. And in speaking with the staff, it appears that we're going to be pretty much the same maybe for this year, Billy, and we already know this, I believe, but it's going to start coming downward in the next few years. And where it levels off, we're not quite sure. Is that a true statement? Yep. Other, we have revenue sharing, went from $2.2 million to $2,199,000. PIPs, $74,000 versus $55,000. Non-public textbooks, $206,000 versus $207,000. And other, we had $623,000 from the state last year. We don't have any of that revenue for this year. So total revenues from state sources went up about $10 million from $118,962,000 to $128,277,000. Federal sources, as we pointed out earlier, in the general fund only, $795,000 last year versus $108,000 this year. And as we pointed out, you did have some federal monies relative to FEMA from the grants, and it's included in that $795,000. Overall, total revenues for the general fund went up from $269,300,000 to $279,048,000. Any further questions on the revenue sources for the general fund? Okay, hearing none, let's go to the next page and we'll begin the details of the expenditures, beginning on page 4, and this will continue on to page 11. I'm not going to go through each line item. What I'd like to do is let's look at the subtotals by the different programs that are listed here, and then we can look up above and see what variances we may be able to comment on. Here on regular programs, which includes, of course, a lot of salaries in this area, as well as the benefits, and it also includes the allocation to the charter schools, which is the last line item within this category. Last year was $10,773,000. This year it's up to $11,520,000. But total for regular programs went from $102,960,000 up to $106,227,000. You look up above, you can see, as I mentioned, the increase of about $4 million. It's kind of scattered through several categories. Primarily, most of it is in the salaries. You can see elementary teachers as well as secondary teachers went up, and of course the employee benefits as well. Any questions here? Next category is special ed programs. And again, very close here. Went from $29,993,000 to $29,544,000. So it's very close. Page 5, vocational education programs went from $3.8 million up to $4.6 million. Some of the increases you might want to scan. Teachers obviously went up from $1.9 million to $2.2 million. The other item is on the supplies. The instructional supplies went down. from 472,000 to 297,000. And also textbooks, however, went up from nothing in this category to 900,000 in this category this year. And that is the bulk of the increase in vocational ed programs. Other instructional programs. Here we went from $6,042,000, went up approximately $1 million to $7,056,000. Again, the larger items here would be about $400,000 in salaries. If you see purchased services went from $25,000 to $530,000. Materials and supplies, of course, went down some, and in employee benefits did go up from $1.8 million to $2.1 million. So up about $1 million, a few items in there, primarily under purchase services, purchase contractual services that we had here. Next category, and I might want to mention all of these are basically in accordance with the state regulations and how these need to be presented. So your detailed chart of accounts is a lot more details than this, but you have to fit this into the format, and this is how we're required to present it based upon the AFR classifications. Special programs. Here we went down from $10,100,000 to $8.4 million. And you can see the salaries for the teachers in this area went from $5.2 million down to $3.7, and of course the employee benefits also went down from $3.2 million to $2.8 million. Adult and continuing education programs was minimal last year, $32,000, and this year we don't have any in this category. Under support services now, pupil support went from $20,110,000 up to $20,996,000. Again, not a tremendous amount of an increase, about $800,000, and it's kind of sprinkled in here. If you look at it, therapists went down, however, counselors, the third category, went up. And scanning right down the line, it's just a few items. Purchase services again went up from $977,000, went up about $300,000 to $1.2 million, and of course employee benefits went up from $6.2 million to $6.7 million. Next category on page 7 is instructional staff support services. And here, there's in this category there was.
Do we know what the increase in the employee benefits, that $500,000, was attributable to?
It would be the payroll taxes, of course, and in the insurance.
The self-insured insurance, or?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay. Instructional staff support on page 7. This category went down approximately $3 million. And part of this is the second line item under instruction, curriculum specialists, went from $2.9 million to $883,000. And this was a movement, I think, and help me on this, Matt, maybe on the AFR. I think that you were required to make some movements into where certain things are classified.
Instructional strategists that were reclassified to instructional coaches.
In another section, that's right. But that's the bulk of this one. It went down $2 million, and if you look at our total category, instructional staff support went from $9.6 million down to $6.7 million. So it went down $3 million. $2 million of which is in instructional and in employee benefits, down towards the bottom of the last line item here, went from $2.9 million to $1.9 million. Right,
Yeah.
right, and we'll get to that in just a minute. And general administration, I think, is the next category, and it begins on page 7. You might want to scan these. One item that did go up is legal services, went up from $615,000 to $1,097,000, but judgments went down from $1,005,000. If you look at that, about the fourth line item from the bottom went down to $437,000. So it's pretty close when you add the two items together. Next page is general administration went down from 5.4 million to 4.9 million. Now under school administration, and I think that's where some of those salaries were reclassed to, that went up from 17.2 million to $20,788,000. But this is the main category. You see the other, I would think, is the 522,000. The fourth line item went up to $2.5 million, and that was the shift from the other category that we just talked about. And of course, employee benefits also went up from 5.2 million to 6.6 million. So those two items are attributable to the increase from 17.2 to 20,788,000. Okay, under business services, fiscal services begins on the bottom of page 8, and most of these are very comparable. If you want to scan those, you can see that they're very, very comparable in all categories. Next page, again, very comparable here. The one item is in miscellaneous that went up from 4,000 up to 198,000. I don't recall specifically what that item was, but in total, business services went from 2.8 million to 3,099,000. Next category is in the operations and maintenance of plant supplies, services. And here, the total went from 21,564,000 to 22,982,000. May want to scan the items, the salaries and so on, and the different categories. Most of those are very comparable. Purchase services went up slightly, a couple of $100,000. Big item is in utilities. One of the big items is Southside, a new school that's in here that we didn't have in the past, but the utilities went up from 5.5 million to 6.4 million. That accounts for pretty much the 1.2 or $1.3 million increase. Excuse me. On the student transportation, begins on page 9, and most of these items are very comparable. Page 10, where it concludes, it was 16.1 million. Last year, 16,151,000. This year, 16,186,000. And again, very comparable when you look at every category. Some increases, some decreases. One thing is bus drivers' lease and operating allowance went down from 2 million down to 1,565,000. Excuse me. Okay, under central services, now this category did go up, and we'll look at why. Went from 4.6 million to 7.3 million. One big category you can look at is materials and supplies. The Chromebooks are in there. It went from 331,000 to $2.4 million. And we talked about this in the exit. Those, Billy, I think we had estimated, or you had estimated, maybe it'll last 3 to 4 years. And how many schools do we have that are using them?
All the schools are using them, all the levels. We have, of course, closer to a 1-to-1 ratio at the middle and high schools.
Good.
But they are being used at all levels.
But we see that we're going to have to replace these probably on a cycle, as I said, about every 3 to 4 years.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Probably, hopefully 4, closer to 4.
Yeah, we're going to shoot for that. Okay, any questions here? All right, the next category is minimal. It's community service operations. You had some salaries there from 96,000 to 104,000. Facilities acquisition and construction went from 13,000 down to 4,000. And on page 11, and we'll look at this in a minute, we're going to have this is the group health plan. We're required to present it on the general fund, but we do show you a separate statement of the operations of it. And of course, this one, it lists all the different expenses, but it's all allocated to different departments, and that's why it balances off to a zero. But you see, it was 50 million last year in total that was allocated, and this year it's 55.7 million. So it did go up about 10%, and that's why I think we saw some of the employee benefit items that did go up. In addition to the salaries possibly going up, they did go up because of the all right, so the total expenditures for the general fund went from $250,685,000 up to $259,101,000. So if you recall, we're going to look at that in just a minute, but you had an increase in total revenues of approximately $10 million. This year, we're showing expenditures going up about $9 million. So we'll look at that in just a minute. And let's do that right now.
Burton, could you just summarize what you just said? So we had a $9 million increase. How much of that was one-time money, if you had to guesstimate? I mean, there was like about $3 million plus in insurance from the floods.
One-time money, MF, well, yeah, that's not going to be recurring. I mean, of the expenses, I don't know that we have. That's probably most of it is going to be reoccurring. I would say.
Yeah, we have the Chromebooks, and then we have what we refer to as cost center 1526, which is spread out throughout each one of these categories, and that's probably in the neighborhood of about $2 million.
But Billy, the Chromebooks, we'll still have to replace some this year. It won't be 2.4 million, but it's probably going to be, what, 800,000?
As far as we're on the back end of a 1-to-1 ratio, so we should see that decrease considerably after 1920. I think we have one more year where we're purchasing for one more grade level, and I think we'll have it 9 to 12, and then we'll see it drop off. So one more year at this level, and then we should see it drop.
So most of that's going to be recurring again in this current fiscal year, the 2.4 million.
Yeah, for another year. Yeah.
All right.
But there was $3 million or so in insurance money.
Oh, that we got last year, yeah, in revenues. But this, I thought you were referring just to the expenditures.
Did we spend it all? I guess that was my. Did we spend all the money that we got?
Well, you may have spent it.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the insurance proceeds were spent,
right.
but they were spent pretty much on capital.
Okay.
So, let's look at page 2, and we'll look at the summary now of the general fund. I think, Eric, what we need to look at is is on the revenue side. As you said, the $3 million will not be reoccurring again from last year. It didn't occur this year, so we don't have that $3 million. We're probably going to see a reduction in some of the state source or the MFP monies. So the $279 million may be close, you know, but and the sales taxes, I think, are trending a little higher this year than they were last year. So hopefully that's going to make up for any state source revenues that we may lose. Now on the instructions, so $279 million of revenues, we had $269,351,000 last year. Then on the expenditures, as we said, we had spent $251 million last year. We spent $259 million for the current year. Our excess of revenues over expenditures before we transfer monies out went from $18.6 million in surplus up to $19.9 million. Now, we always transfer some monies out, and we transfer some for capital improvements, and this year we did transfer more monies. One of the reasons is you reduce the reserve that we have from 90 days, I think we went to 2.5 months or 70 days. So that was an additional transfer that was made, and you can see the total transfers last year, net transfers out of the general fund was 16 million. This year we're up to 42 million. So we're showing a decrease in the or a deficiency of revenues of $22 million that was taken out of the fund balance for the current year, and your total fund balance in the general fund went down from 91.4 million down to $69 million. And we'll look at that. We can look at that equalization at this time if you'd like, and that is on page 15. If you want to quickly look at 15, we'll show you how that equalization is computed. You can see what you do is we take the general fund final budgeted expenditures after the effect of the group self-insurance fund, and it's $266,531,000. We take the stabilization fund percentage, which is 75 days, it's 20.8%, and it says total funds committed for economic stabilization at 6/30/18 at $55.5 million. Prior to that, it would have been 25% because we were at 90 days. Okay? That being said, I wanted to just look at a few comparisons for the general fund, and that's going to start on page 12. Page 12 will indicate the 4 years of history for Lafayette Parish School Board. June of 15, 16, 17, 18. And it will also show the per pupil average revenue and expenditures per pupil. I'm not going to look at every line item, but let's just see what the trends are, at least by the subcategories. On the parish sources, we're at $4,774 per pupil in 15, $144 million. Pretty much stayed the same the next year, but the per pupil went again at $4,768 in parish sources. In 17, it did go up, $4,896, and this year stayed pretty much the same at $4,858. Revenues were $149 million last year, including the monies for the insurance proceeds, and this year's $151 million, as we just pointed out. Now, under state sources, that number has gone up a little. It was at $3,758 in 15, went to $3,828 per pupil in 16, then it went up to $3,894, and this year's the highest of the 4 years at $4,137. Mainly because, if you recall, our equalization or MFP monies went up approximately $10 million. Federal sources have been minimal except for last year where we did get some FEMA monies, and you can see it's identified there at $722,000 in 2017. Total general fund revenues that this system has received per pupil has gone from $8,534, and in 16 went to $8,598, 17 was at $8,816, and in 18 was $8,998. All right, the expenditures now. How were the money spent? We looked at the current year versus the prior year, but let's look at it on a per pupil basis. For direct instruction, we spent $5,053 in 15, went up to $4,997 in 16, $5,000 in 17, and this year $5,027. The direct student related services went from $2,888 in 15, we spent $2,789 in 16, and in 2007-73, this year is at $2,827. One of the items, if you want to look at transportation, the past 3 years have been pretty consistent, but more so the last 2 years. It's averaging $522 per pupil in transportation. And if you look back in 15, we were spending $614 on transportation. So you went down about $100 on the school, student transportation from 15 up until 18. So total student expenditures in 2015, we spent $7,941 per pupil. In 16, $7,786. In 17, $7,781. And in 18, $7,854. You can see the percentages. They're very consistent. Percentage of total expenditures that was spent on student and student-related expenses. 94% in each case every year, and as high as 95% in 15. On the support services, for the balance of it, which is general administration, business services, central services, and so on, this past year we spent $499 per pupil, and if you look back last year, it was $424 per pupil. Total general fund expenditures, we received about $8,998. As we pointed out, we spent $8,353 this year. Had a surplus before transfers of $645 per pupil. In 17, it was $611. In 16, it was only $386, and in 15, it was only $184. But we've had surpluses every year of the 4 years that are presented here. Any questions on these numbers? Okay, on next page, page 13, just to give you a further analysis of these numbers and how the expenditures break down by type. Personnel expenditures for salaries and employee benefits this past year, $210,054,000. Last year, $205,377,000. Prior year was $208 million. Before the year before that, $214,900,000. And you can see the related percentages. Way back in 15, we were spending 87% on salaries and benefits. Went down to 84, and it's kind of leveled off at 82 last year and 81 this year. So we've come downward on the total percentage of salaries and employee benefits. Under other expenditures, for instructional materials and supplies, you can see those numbers have increased. $5.7 million up to $6.6 million, $10 million, and then now $11.4 million. Includes the textbooks and the Chromebooks. Again, we spent about 4.4% on instructional materials. Repairs. Those items have pretty much stayed the same, 2.5% this year, 2.3% last year. Utilities and telephone. This one is a little higher. As we pointed out, we have the new Southside High School in these numbers, 2.56% or $6.6 million, which we pointed out earlier, and last year was $5.7 million or 2.3%. Insurance costs. Those have pretty much leveled off. As you can see, $1.9 million pretty much every year here, 1.8 to 1.9. Contracted services did go up this year from $3.5 million last year, $3,473,000, up to $4.7 million for the current year. And appropriations to charter schools, you can see those numbers, and it was as low as $742,000 in 15 4 years ago, and this year we spent $11.5 million or 4.45% on the appropriation to charter schools. Under other, that item went down. It's been hovering around $6.3 million up to $6.9 million last year, down to $6.1 million for the current year. Total other expenditures for Lafayette Parish School System, way back in 15, again with the low number on the charter schools, it was $32 million. Went up to $39 million the next year, but the charter school jumped up to $9 million. Next year we had $10.8 million in charters, and our total expenditures are $45.3 million. And in 2018, we're at $49 million. And of course, here's your total expenditures that we just talked about. So you've got 4 years of history on the per pupil with the revenues, as well as a detailed breakdown of the expenditures in 2 different manners. Any questions here? Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to the next page, and page 14 presents the fund balance of the general fund, and it gives you the different categories, and here is where that stabilization is, as well as some other categories for the self-insurance and so on. On the non-spendable, you have 1.5 million pretty much for 17 and 18. Total committed was 77 million last year. That was with 68 million of economic stabilization. This year, the economic stabilization, as we pointed out earlier, went to 55.5 million. So our total committed went from 77 million down to 64.5 million. Assigned is pretty much the same, $3 million last year versus $2,500,000 this year. Unassigned did go down from 9.2 million down to $477,000. Any questions here? Okay, we've already covered page 15. What I'd like to do is to look at page 16 and look at the food service fund. Don't need to spend a whole lot of time, I don't think, on this. You can see our revenues went down approximately 600,000 from 17.2 million down to 16 million 500,000, and the expenditures, however, went up from 14.5 million to 15.1 million, and your surplus, however, went from 2.6 million down to 1.3 million for the year. But your accumulated fund balance or reserves here is about $6.4 million at year end. So you're still in a pretty healthy financial position in food service. Okay, what we may want to do next is look at pages 17 and 18, and this pertains to the group self-insurance fund. Let's look at 18 first, which is the operations of the internal service or group self-insurance fund. And some of these numbers we had looked at earlier. Total charges for services were $55,797,000 this year, and last year was $52.6 million. Operating expenses, contractual services, pretty much the same, 2.8 million versus 3.1. Premium payments, 2.4 million versus 2.6 million. The claims payments, obviously, or the higher item, went from 44.2 million to 49.3 million. And total operating expenses for this fund went from 50,272,000, went up by about $5 million to 55.7 million. Operating income went down from 2,388,000 to 74,869. You did do better on the interest that you've earned. Again, rates have increased slightly, and so it did go up from 65,000 to 157,000. And your bottom line net income for the group self-insurance fund went from 2.4 million, and the surplus this year is $232,000. Net position went from 8.2 million up to close to 8.4 million, again because of the surplus for the year. You may want to look at how much is available here, and on page 17, if you go back one page, basically it's the balance sheet of the group self-insurance fund. You can see cash and interest-bearing deposits went from 10 million up to 13.8 million. Investments, $5,600 to 1.6 million. Some receivables that we had, 891,000 versus 900,000, and due from other funds was 3.5 million last year, but we only had 162,000 owed from other funds to this fund at year end. Then the liabilities. So you had total assets of 14.6 million. This year we're at 16.4 million. Our liabilities, however, went up from 6.5 million to 8,055,000. As you can see, the claims payable at year end went from 3.7 million up to 5.3 million. It's just a snapshot as of June 30th, 18 versus 17. And then, of course, the net position is what we just looked at. Went up about $200,000 because of the surplus for the year. Any questions on the group self-insurance fund? Okay. Well, as we speak, but some other things could develop. But yeah, we had some I think it was 3 or 4 of those that were extraordinary last year. Cases. What I would like to do is to look back at the general fund. We didn't look at the balance sheet of the general fund. That's on page 1. We looked at the operations, and revenues were up, as I recall, about 10 million. Expenditures pretty much the same, and our surplus was around 19 million before transfers. But let's look at a snapshot of that general fund. Remember, we transferred quite a bit of monies into the capital projects account, and also that was a reduction of the stabilization. So the cash and interest-bearing deposits on page 1 of the general fund went down from $129,829,000 down to $88,009,000. Investments, on the other hand, went up from $16.5 million to $37.8 million. So we're up $20 million here, and we're down about $43 million in the cash and interest-bearing deposits. Accounts receivable, very close. $1.3 million last year, $1.1 million this year. Accrued interest, $43,000 versus receivable up to $83,000. Due from other funds did go down from $19 million down to $16.7 million, and due from other governmental agencies went down from $1.7 million down to only $167,000. Other went up, from $138,000 to $196,000, and your prepaid items virtually the same at $1.2 million both years. Inventories, $392,000 versus $367,000, and total assets for the general fund as of June 18 compared to June 17, we had $170,444,000 for 17. We're at $145,693,000 for 18. Under the liabilities, those are very consistent and very close. Last year was $78 million in total liabilities, $78,900,000. This year, $76,656,000. So we're down on total liabilities approximately $2 million. Your fund balance went down, as we talked about, from $91 million down to $69 million, and we've looked at those categories, and the big drivers on that was the unassigned amount and the committed, which includes the economic stabilization. Any questions on the balance sheet? Okay, hearing none, I think now we could maybe look, if you want to look at the comparisons to the other school systems, which we generally show you, and that's going to be on pages 21 and 22. Okay. Again, here you have the comparisons of the Lafayette Parish school system versus Calcasieu versus St. Tammany. And you can see the number of pupils, and it's kind of difficult to read because it's pretty small, but we have to be able to fit it on one page. We've got to do it this way. St. Tammany, if you look at the number of pupils up at the top where it says average revenue per pupil, St. Tammany was at 38,300 pupils. Calcasieu is at 32,932. And Lafayette Parish last year was at 31,015 pupils. Then we look at it from the standpoint of the revenues and how much was coming from parish sources, how much was coming from state sources. And we have the comparisons to 17. I'm going to mainly focus on 18. Revenues per pupil at St. Tammany from parish sources was $5,400 per pupil. Calcasieu is up to $7,425. Now, if you recall, we talked about this last year. They passed an additional sales tax there. And then ours is at $5,702. So we're a little higher from the parish source standpoint than St. Tammany, but quite a bit below Calcasieu Parish. State sources, St. Tammany is at $5,500, Calcasieu is at $4,509 per pupil, and Lafayette is at $4,137. Again, not far below, but about $300 per pupil below Calcasieu, but significantly below St. Tammany, and we've seen this in the past. Total general fund revenues, St. Tammany is bringing in $10,941 per pupil. Look at Calcasieu at $11,949, and Lafayette Parish at $9,842 in total. Now down at the bottom you have some other statistics that we point out. The ad valorem millage in this parish is at 33.56 mils. Calcasieu is at 17.23 mils, and St. Tammany is at 48.5 mils. So we're higher, quite a bit higher than Calcasieu, but quite a bit lower than St. Tammany. Approximate sales tax rate, we're at 2%, Calcasieu's at 2.5%, and St. Tammany's at 2%. And you can see the general fund equity. Ours is the lowest here in Lafayette Parish. St. Tammany's at 111 million, Calcasieu's at 95 million, and the general fund equity here, as we pointed out, is about $69 million. Outstanding debt, St. Tammany's at 280 million, Calcasieu's at 192 million, and Lafayette is at 205 million. Bonded debt. The number of schools, and you can see Calcasieu is at 59, St. Tammany's at 55. They've got more pupils. Lafayette's at 43 schools. Population, as you can see, we're at 242,000 in the parish. Calcasieu's at 202, and St. Tammany is at 256,000. Number of teachers, we're far below the others. Again, we have less pupils though, but St. Tammany was at 2,682, Calcasieu 2,490, and Lafayette Parish was at 1,946. So just some statistics that you may want to look at. Next page is page 22. And again, how were the monies spent? We've looked at the details on this school system. We've looked at 4 years of history. We've looked at just comparisons of 1 year to the other, 18 versus 17. Here we're going to look at how the other school systems spend and how we relate to that. Percentage-wise, we're very close, but obviously they've got more money, so they've spent more. On instruction, St. Tammany was at $6,669, Calcasieu's at $6,871, and Lafayette Parish is at $5,871. But look at the percentages right below that. We're at 64%. Calcasieu's at 63%, and St. Tammany's at 62%. So percentage-wise, we're spending more as a percentage of our total on direct instructional expenses. Student-related expenses, however, we're being outspent. The St. Tammany's at $3,533, or 33% of theirs. Calcasieu is at $3,671, and they're at 33%. Lafayette Parish is at $2,827. We're at 31%. So we're a little bit below there. Total student expenditures, and it's pretty comparable here as far as percentages go, but obviously they're spending more because they're receiving more per pupil. 10,202 is the St. Tammany Parish. 10,542 is Calcasieu Parish, and Lafayette Parish is at 8,698. Percentage-wise, you can see we're at 94.5%. Calcasieu's at 96%. St. Tammany is at 95%. So it's hovering in the 94.5 to 96% range. So we're right in that ballpark there. Now, on other student support, other support services, which includes the general administration, business services, and so on, Calcasieu's at 505 per pupil. Calcasieu at 413, St. Tammany's at 505, and Lafayette Parish we're at 499. So we look pretty comparable here, especially with St. Tammany. We're a little bit above Calcasieu. Total general fund expenditures per pupil. St. Tammany's at 10,707, Calcasieu, $10,955, and Lafayette Parish is at $9,197. The excess that remains before transfers out, you can see St. Tammany's at $234 per pupil. Calcasieu's at $994 per pupil, $32.7 million, and Lafayette Parish is at $645 per pupil, with a surplus of right at $20 million for the year prior to transfers. Pupil-teacher ratios are indicated here. St. Tammany's at 14.29, very rough percentages. Calcasieu is at 13.2, and Lafayette Parish is at 15.9 to 1. Any questions on this page? One final thing I wanted to mention, and that's going to be the comparison of the fund balances and the number of approximate available days of operation, and that's going to be on page 23. Page 23. Again, this is, if you look at it, general fund available fund balance. You have committed for economic stabilization. We looked at that earlier. And you're unassigned. That's basically what you have available in reserves. Okay, we had 78 million last year. We had 56 million this year. Calcasieu was at 56 million last year. They're at 42 million this year. St. Tammany in total, and they have something that's assigned for local priorities, and I'm assuming it's their version of economic stabilization. They were at 106 million in total last year. They're at 109,768,000 for the current year. We compare that to the general operating expenditures of each system. Obviously, ours is a little bit lower than the others. Monthly operating expenses, and you can see Lafayette Parish is spending about $21.5 million on monthly operating expenses. Calcasieu last year spent $30 million. St. Tammany spent $34 million. We compare the approximate expenditures and we look at how much available reserves that you may have. You can see Lafayette Parish last year was at 3.7 months or 111 days. This year we're down to 2.6 months or 78 days, but that was intentional. We did that. We wanted to bring it down to approximately 75 days of available reserves. Calcasieu was at 60 days last year. They're down to 42 days this year. And St. Tammany was at 99 days. They're down to 96 days. Any questions regarding any of the information that we have gone over? There's a lot of data here, a lot of comparability. Overall, I mean, we're pleased with what we see relative to the findings that I talked about earlier. I think there's some improvements, especially in that school activity area. Your numbers pan out exactly the way that it was planned by the board to go ahead and get the reserve down to 75 days, and you're operating right at that at 78 days of available reserves in the fund. So, and your staff does a good job. So we're very pleased with what's going on here and with the trend, and with the information that's being presented to this board, it enables you to make good decisions. They're giving you good information that you can rely upon. And so overall, like I said, we're pleased with what we did with the audit, with the results of the audit. So any questions that you may have? Yes, sir.
On page 18, when we talk about the group self-insurance fund, I just want to make sure I appreciate what I'm looking at.
What page are you referring?
18, the 2017 to 2018, the total operating expenses went up by about 10%.
Yes.
Do we know, I mean, I see that, you know, contractual service, I see where it went up, but do we know, and maybe somebody else in the audience can talk more specifically if we had some, I think Mr. Dugas mentioned we had some unique high claims, but do we see this to be a trend? Is this something that we need to think about for next year? We're going to have a 10% increase next year, or
we'll know a little bit more in March. We've been reviewing it. So to answer your question, part of it is due to what we refer to as shock claims. At this point, we feel they're shock claims. those out of the ordinary and non-recurring. So some of it is due to that. And so we're expecting come March, next month, we'll have a couple more months of information, and we'll be able to better determine what kind of changes we might need to recommend to the board, if any. But we are expecting to see some changes being recommended.
Thank you.
So shock claims, a little bit in prescription drugs, both in health and in prescription drugs. In prescription drugs, one of the things that we reviewed was they've redirected just a handful, I think it was like 2 or 3 patients from one drug to another, and just that redirection was over $600,000 in savings. So we'll see that come down a little. So between the shock claims and that reduction in prescription drugs, we're hoping that we can minimize the changes that we're going to come to the board and recommend the next couple of months.
Thank you.
So I guess it's kind of hard to say, Eric, as Mr. Guidry indicated, as of right now, hopefully it will be stabilized, I'm going to say, but you never know what other claims may crop up. Any additional questions? Okay, hearing none.
Does the public have any questions for Mr. Calder after that lengthy explanation of a lot of numbers? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Calder, for coming tonight. Do you have anything else?
I just wanted to thank the board for allowing us to work with you again this year. It's always a pleasure, and if we have any questions, I'll certainly free to try and answer those questions.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the school system, let me say we appreciate all of your efforts.
Thank you, sir.
That being the last item on the agenda, this meeting is adjourned until 5:30.